Well, it's the video you've all been waiting for. Heck, it's the video we've been waiting for. The preview of the most important game of OU's 2023 season. And you can make the argument, Jesse Crittenden, that this is always the most important game of OU's season. It's the Red River Showdown or Red River Shootout, whatever you prefer, to take place at the Cotton Bowl in early October. Always a spectacle between the Sooners and the Longhorns. Obviously, the 2022 iteration of the Red River rivalry did not go in the Sooners' favor, and that's putting it mildly. 49-0, memorable beatdown by the Longhorns on that particular day. OU was obviously hamstrung without Dylan Gabriel at the controls. The expectation, naturally, in 2023 is that Oklahoma is going to shake back and that their performance at the Cotton Bowl this year won't remotely replicate their performance at the Cotton Bowl last year. But just kind of general thoughts on how these two teams match up on paper, Jesse, because I will say this. The one thing we do know about this rivalry from years of watching it and covering it is that how these two teams match up on paper is generally not an exact reflection of how the game transpires on Saturday afternoon. But that aside, what are your rapid reactions when you look over these two rosters and how they stack up?
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think this game is always significant, but this year's game in particular feels extra important. You mentioned how bad that beatdown was last year. You can take that angle, or you can take the fact that this is the last time these two teams will face as Big 12 opponents before going to the SEC next year. I think that makes this game feel more important. And before breaking down this matchup specifically, I'm going to say a hot take that I didn't tell you I was gonna say
Oh,
before we
okay.
started.
I'm down for hot takes.
I think for Texas, I was going through their roster. Who do they have returning? What did their recruiting class look like? Refreshing myself on all that. I
Sure.
think if Texas doesn't finish the regular season with at least 10 wins and an appearance in the Big 12 title game, that is a huge failure. That is an utter failure on paper. And we've said this for a million years now.
Yeah.
But here in particular, there is simply no reason Texas shouldn't finish with 10 wins and a spot in the Big 12 title game. There's just no reason that should happen, or that shouldn't happen.
No, you're exactly right. On paper, Texas has the most talented roster in the Big 12. Easily. But if the game were played on paper, Jesse, Texas would have won the Big 12 probably 10 out of the last 15 years. What the Longhorns have struggled with, though, is taking all the talent that they have on the roster and being able to cobble together a lineup on either side that plays cohesively and a team culture on a larger scale that lends itself to sustained success. That's something Texas has not been able to grasp. It's been there. It's been there for upwards of a decade now. But ever since their national championship run in Colt McCoy's senior year, where they eventually fell at the hands of Alabama, it's been a myriad of ups and downs and peaks and valleys for this program. And it seems they're always getting touted as the breakout candidate in the Big 12 every offseason, and it never comes to fruition. So here we are in 2023. The Big 12 is wide open as a whole, and we've talked about this in past videos. It is wide open. I was looking at Texas Tech's schedule today, and I was going, man, I might see 10 wins for Tech this year in the regular season. That's how wide open the Big 12 is. And so, yes, if Texas can't capitalize this year, you got to wonder, when does this team arrive on the scene once again? When are they back?
Yeah, no kidding. And even just look again, I mean, last year they finished 8-5. They were the only team in the Big 12 that finished in the top three in offense and defense. Considering they also just the talent they had, it is sort of remarkable that they only finished with 8 wins last season. You look ahead to this season, they bring back so many players from last season. They bring back their starting quarterback and Quinn Ewers. They bring back their top 3 receivers. They do need to replace Bijan Robinson, but they returned so many of their skill players. Their offensive line should be really good. They returned so many of their key players from defense last year. I think 3 of their 4 tackle leaders from last year. Obviously, losing Overshone is going to hurt, but they got so many guys. And look at the recruiting class they're bringing in. It's a consensus top 5 recruiting class. They got several 5-star guys. On paper, this should be easily OU's toughest matchup, and Texas should probably be the favorite to win the Big 12. having said that, like you said, I think this has been a matchup that has always been hard to predict. And with all that said, there's no reason to think OU shouldn't be able to compete with Texas, and there's no reason to assume Texas is going to live up to their potential. I think that's what makes this game really interesting. But I think if you're OU, coming from last year's 49-0 beatdown, now I know Dylan Gabriel was hurt. Texas should be good this year, but I think if you're OU, this is really going to come down to where can you compete? Can you compete against a really good, or what should be a really good Texas offense? Can your defense compete against what should be a really good Texas offense?
Well, and with the knowledge that Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson are no longer on this Texas roster, Jesse, and with some major question marks as to who fills the void in the backfield in those two guys' absence, you'd have to imagine that Brent Venables and this Oklahoma defense are going to do everything they can to make sure that Texas's hopes of winning the game are pinned solely to Quinn Ewers at the quarterback position. If that's the case, if Texas has to win a football game behind Quinn Ewers' arm, can you trust the Longhorns to do that?
No, that kind of goes along with what I was thinking. I think if you're Brent Venables, you got to get pressure on Quinn Ewers, force him to make decisions, force him to get outside the pocket and throw. I think there were just too many times in the game last year where he had too much time back there to make decisions. And I think he's a guy that showed time and time again last year, when forced to make quick decisions, when faced to make decisions under pressure, that's when he struggles. And so I think if you're OU, yeah, absolutely. The game plan going in has got to be get pressure on Quinn Ewers, make him win the football game. And I think if they can do that, I think that definitely tilts the scales in OU's favor.
What are some of the more compelling individual matchups that you see? And, looking at the rosters top to bottom for Oklahoma and Texas, obviously there is a ton of talent on both sides. These are the two most talented teams in the Big 12, at least on paper. Got to always add that caveat. But what are some of the more compelling individual matchups that you see as you evaluate how Oklahoma matches up with UT?
Yeah, I mentioned the returning skill positions earlier. That includes the top 3 wide receivers from last year. Obviously, Xavier Worthy being at the top of that list. He's not the only wide receiver threat that's coming back from last year. But I think if you're looking, especially with Texas having to replace Bijan Robinson, I think that's going to put more of the offense on Xavier Worthy, which then I think puts more pressure on OU's defensive backs to win that matchup. Because I think if Xavier Worthy gets free, that just makes things easier for Quinn Ewers in this offense. So, and we talked about it, in the recent video we just did about breakout players. We talked about some of the players in that OU defensive back room. I think this is going to be a really big game for those players. Whether is it Gentry Williams that gets that gets some time on him? Is it Billy Bowman? Is it Woody Washington? Is it Reggie Pearson? Now, I think OU is going to have that defensive back room figured out, obviously, by the time the Texas game comes along. But I think this is going to be the big test, especially if any young guys in that room get playing time. I think this is going to be the game they probably get tested more than any other point this season.
And to me, as I look at this, I feel like I can say with some degree of confidence that Texas's most ballyhooed position group is the offensive line. And so it's going to be a pretty stiff litmus test for Oklahoma's defensive line, conversely, because that is the one group across the entire roster, Jesse. And we've talked about this ad nauseum. There are some question marks on the defensive line as far as who steps in, who contributes, who breaks out. We don't really know what that picture looks like. We all have our guesses, but lose Jalen Redmond, lose Jeffrey Johnson. If Reggie Grimes is still starting, I think you got concerns there. You got concerns about that whole situation. But all in all, Oklahoma does have a lot of major question marks surrounding what the defensive line looks like. And so whatever that arrangement, whatever the combination is up front for Oklahoma defensively, this is where we're going to truly get a sense of whether they've turned the corner or whether it's the same old that it was in 2022. Now, I know our feelings on this game and on this matchup will evolve naturally, but right now, midsummer 2023, months away from this game's actual date on which it'll be played, thoughts on which way it swings? You favor Oklahoma, you favor Texas?
Yeah, I think that is tough, and you just mentioned all the caveats. Things are going to change. I think both teams went into last year's game 3-2, and I think pretty disappointed in how their seasons had gone to that point. I think Texas faces a little bit of a tougher test. I mean, they get Alabama in the non-conference schedule, which I should have mentioned earlier with the 10-win threshold that they should surpass. I think, like you said, on paper, these two teams easily have the most talent than any other team in the Big 12, which makes this game really interesting. But I do think Texas has a slight. What makes this hard is I think Texas does have a slight advantage in terms of talent on their roster compared to OU's. The hard thing is they've never lived up to that talent, and they haven't done it in the last 15 years. So I think if I'm having to make a guess, just looking at names on paper, I think Texas probably has the advantage. We saw what they did last year, even with Dylan Gabriel being hurt. Now, I don't expect that, and I think OU is going to have every chance to win this game. But this is going to easily be OU's toughest game of the season. And I think if you're Texas, considering you probably have the roster talent advantage, considering how disappointing the last few seasons are, considering you're going to the SEC next season, Texas should be properly motivated to win this game. So I'm making a prediction now. It's Texas. I think it's going to be a close game regardless. And if you're telling me that the first 5 weeks of the season show that Texas is crumbling again, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm not trying to sound like a sunshine pumper here, but I like Oklahoma in that matchup, and I like it because I think it historically, in recent memory, this game has more often than not showcased the discrepancy in culture between these two programs. The culture of resilience at Oklahoma and, well, the exact inverse at Texas. And the Longhorns have beaten the Sooners twice in the last 8 years. There was obviously a very extenuating circumstance last year. You understand why Texas pounded Oklahoma the way that they did. And their other victory over the Sooners in the last 8 years came in a year where Oklahoma fielded possibly the worst defense in the history of the program. So there's a lot more data, at least the way I see it. There's a lot more data to suggest that last year was an aberration than the beginning of a new trend. So I favor Oklahoma, at least as things stand right now. Granted, it could be a completely different conversation mid-September, and I have no doubt we'll revisit this down the line. But for where we stand in late June, early July, I'd say that's about as good of a Red River shootout, showdown preview that you could ask for. And with that, we'll call it a wrap on this installment of Quick Slants. This is the OU Insider YouTube channel. If you're not a VIP at ouinsider.com, would highly recommend that if you want to stay up to date on the daily rumblings with Oklahoma football and recruiting in particular. Softball, basketball, baseball, got it all covered on that side. But football and recruiting is obviously what most of you are most invested in, and that's what you will get the most coverage of. $8 a month. It's not that much to get unparalleled access to all of the insider intel on OU football, as well as all the juice from the recruiting trail. For Jesse Crittenden, I am Parker Thune. Check us out over on ouinsider.com. Hit subscribe on that button below this video, and we'll see you next time here on Quick Slants on the OU Insider YouTube channel.